What up, everyone? You are here with Luminol on the wall. Well, half of us. I'm Bevy, and Becky is not here with us tonight. If you guys know, my mom has been trying to sell her house, and she has sold it. So, thank you, Jesus, because that took a while. My mom was super stressed out, and either way, she has gone to British Columbia to look for new homes, and Becky went with her. Becky's been doing some renos lately as a little side gig, and my mom wanted her opinions and whatnot, so that's where she is. And honestly, we could not even find time to get together to do this, so here we are. I hope I can do it justice, and I think I will because this is a pretty wild case. And the reason that it is so wild is because it is about a 30-year-old British woman who became one of the UK's most notorious murderers. And this woman is named Joanna Dennehy. Dennehy's crimes unfolded in and around March/April of 2013. It happened over the course of 10 days where she stabbed 3 men to death in and around the Peterborough area and wounded 2 more in Hertford. And what makes her case especially shocking is that she was a woman and she got away with murder for nearly 2 weeks. Now, if you guys know anything about true crime, which I'm guessing you do since you're here, most murders happen by men. So the fact that this woman went on basically a little bit of a killing spree really shocked the community. So I will walk you through the story from the beginning, victim by victim, crime by crime, and I will include every jaw-dropping detail. So let's start it off with talking about who Joanna Dennehy was. So Joanna, aka Jo, and I will refer to her as Jo for the remainder of this episode, grew up in a seemingly ordinary English family. She was born in 1982 in Hertfordshire, England. She was raised with her younger sister by a shop manager mom and a security guard dad. And by all accounts, her childhood was comfortable. She played sports like netball and hockey. She did well in school and was even expected to become a lawyer. But by the age of around 13, 14, she ended up meeting some fairground workers who had given her some drugs and alcohol, and this ended up being a huge turning point in Jo's life. She continued doing drugs and alcohol. She started acting out at home and at school. Jo also got the attention of a man who was 5 years older than her, and his name was John. The two of them were polar opposites and quite drawn to each other. Joanna's parents strongly disagreed with this relationship due to the age gap and tried to keep the two apart, but their efforts were basically futile. Jo would just run away and do what she wanted to do. And this pattern of her running away and doing her own thing continued for a while. And by the time she had turned 16, she had run away so many times that her parents felt like enough was enough and she could just be on her own. So when she left her parents' house, John asked his mother if Jo could stay. But when Jo moved into John's mother's home, it took his mother by surprise, realizing just how young she was. And after realizing her age, John's mother tried to warn them of the complications of the age gap, but since they were not going to break up, she kicked them out, and she wasn't going to let that inappropriate relationship in her home. So after getting kicked out, John and Jo bounced around from drug and doss houses, which are cheap lodging places for homeless people, addicts, and prostitutes. And unfortunately, by surrounding themselves with this crowd, Jo's addiction actually accelerated. Eventually, she was arrested on burglary charges and was sentenced to a juvenile detention center. Eventually, she was released and ended up having a baby with John at 17. Now, Joanna was virtually an absent parent. She was always going out partying and doing God knows what, leaving John to care for the child at all times. Now, from my own experience of a child rearing for the past 6 months, I will say any parent or any partner who leaves their significant other with the baby over and over and over again, like that's going to cause some issues. It's tough being a full-time parent. You never get a night off, but then you pair that with your partner making really bad choices, partying, drugs, or what have you. And it's just like a double whammy. Like that's gotta hurt. So the cracks in the relationship really do start to form. But that being said, the couple did eventually move to Norfolk to start fresh. And right away, despite the complications of having their first child, John and Jo became pregnant with their second child. However, after birth, Jo was back to her old habits and all of her rebellious ways. And on top of that, Jo started to become violent at home and in front of her two children. She was also self-harming, stabbing herself with needles, cutting her limbs and stomach, and she had no qualms about wearing clothes that revealed her injuries. There was this one memorable night in 2009 where Jo came out from harming herself and she had blood just dripping down her legs and pulled out a knife and stabbed it as hard as she could into the ground. Luckily, the children were sleeping, but this situation scared John, and he decided that it had all gone too far, so he packed up the children and left and moved back in with his mom. After this incident and having her family move away, Jo decided to move to Peterborough and began a somewhat transient lifestyle, bouncing from couch to couch. She was also in and out of prison for several petty crimes, and as soon as she got out of prison, she would be right back in. In the year of 2012, she ended up getting released from prison on probation, and it was at this time that she met Kevin Lee, who was a 48-year-old who had a number of bedsits and renovation projects around town. And Joanna began living in one of his bedsits. And the two came to the agreement that Kevin would not collect rent from Jo, but Jo would have to handle tenants who were late or didn't pay their rent. She would also be responsible for any painting and little things like that around Kevin's properties. It was very clear that Kevin had a real soft spot for Jo. She apparently had told him she was brutally abused by her stepfather growing up, and she flirted with him and ended up becoming his mistress. Now, Kevin was about the only person to have a real soft spot for Jo around this time because she was kind of raising hell in her shared living accommodation situation. Her roommates described her as aggressive, and she seemed to like intimidating people. She told them she had just been released from prison for killing her abusive father, which was a lie. But because of her intimidating ways, some of the roommates didn't enjoy living with her. So much, in fact, that at least one of them moved out due to her behavior. So we're kind of setting the scene of Jo becoming a little bit more unruly. People are having a hard time being around her. She's engaging in criminal activity, and it's kind of all going downhill. So fast forward to March of 2013. Jo was out on the town when she met a 31-year-old Polish man named Łukasz Slobowski. Łukasz was a kind and happy person. He was a delivery driver, but he did have a bit of a drug problem, which he was on methadone for. And when he met Jo, she flirted with him and they began speaking, and it wasn't long before Łukasz was charmed by her. On Tuesday, March 19th, Jo sent a series of text messages to Łukasz inviting him over to her place. Łukasz believed he had found a lover. He even texted a friend that day saying, "Life is beautiful," as if looking forward to what he thought would be a fun encounter between him and Jo. But what happened next was insanely brutal. Early that evening, Łukasz arrived at the little bedsit where Jo lived, and not long after he stepped through the front door, Jo attacked him with a pocket knife, and she stabbed Łukasz right through the heart. He died almost instantly. Now, even though Jo had technically invited Łukasz over with the intention to kill him, she ultimately didn't really plan anything else about this crime. So she needed help transporting the body because she didn't have a car or a license. So she ends up calling her friend Gary Richards, aka Stretch. Now, Stretch was a career criminal who was 7'3". So, of course, she called him to help her move a man's body. At the time, she also called Kevin and told him they have a dead man in one of his homes. And if your wife finds out, that will mean big trouble. So Joe convinces Kevin to buy a beaten up green Vauxhall Astra that they jokingly nicknamed the hearse so they could remove the body. Wow. I just have to say, like, how sick is it to call the vehicle that you're using to move a dead body that, like, of a person you just murdered, the hearse? That just shows a distinct lack of empathy for a person who just died at your hands. Like, that's not funny. It's pretty shocking also that, like, she just has, it seems like a litany of people that she can call to help her commit murder. But anyways, we'll just move on and I'll tell you about another person she enlists to help her. So she contacts a fellow housemate named Leslie Layton to dispose of Lucas's corpse. And all of these people, just help Joe. And they decide to first move Lucas's body into the wheeled garbage bin outside. And when Gary arrived, Joe was standing next to the bin, grinning with pride with what she had just done. When she was asked what was inside the garbage bin, she opened the lid to reveal Lucas's body, still warm, in the bin. Gary said that Joe was just standing by the bin, that she kept smiling as if it were some sick joke. After that, Joanna, Stretch, and Layton all drove out to a remote ditch in the countryside. There, in the pitch black, they emptied the wheelie bin into the ditch. So after this first murder, Joe kind of had this taste for blood, and she just wanted more of it. She's like a freaking vampire over here, jeez. So just 10 days later, so we're now at March 29th, on a Good Friday, Joe struck again. Her second victim was John Chapman, who was a 56-year-old tenant of Kevin Lee's. He was a retired Marine and widow. So if you remember, Joe had basically been asked by Kevin to help out around these bedsits to deal with like people who weren't paying rent or just, issues in general. So Kevin had had several complaints that John's place was just emitting a terrible odor. And on top of that, he had not paid his rent, so Kevin calls Joe to sort it out for him. So that evening, she went to pay John a visit. Now, just like with Lucas, Joe went to John's place knowing that she wanted to kill him. So she plunged the same little knife into him once in the neck and twice through the heart, and just 3 times in the chest. It was a quick and very efficient killing. And after it was done, Joe texted Stretch, "Oops, I did it again." This shows that she was almost gleeful and really nonchalant about having killed another human being. It's hard to believe that this is a real life scenario, because isn't this just kind of what we see in movies all the time? Like, even in John Wick, right? Killings happen, they call the cleaners, they come clean it all up, and it all gets sorted out. And it's almost like that is what's happening between Joe and Stretch. Like, it's pretty wild to me that all she has to do is like text someone and they just do her dirty work and almost have no qualms about it. I think that's what's most shocking, is that she just has somebody readily available to be like, "Hey, dispose of a dead body, please and thank you." And they're like, "Oh yeah, of course, Joe, no big deal. Let me help you out with that." Like, just insane. So, of course, Stretch comes to help Joe. And they load John into the car and dump him in the same ditch just outside Peterborough, where Lucas's body lay. After they fled, Joanna and Stretch took the car to an isolated road and torched it to burn any evidence. Now, here's where things kind of take a turn, because up to this point, Joe has really killed people that she did not have a close relationship. Her crimes haven't been very well thought out, and they've kind of been rather impulsive. But with her third victim, she actually kills somebody that has been rather close to her. So on Saturday, March 30th, Kevin Lee, who we know owned the bedsits that Joe was staying in and who Joe was having a adulterous relationship with, was going about a normal weekend and visiting friends. One acquaintance later told police how Kevin confided in his friends over that weekend that he was actually scared of Joe. He claimed that she, quote unquote, wanted to dress me up and rape me. He described disturbing fantasies she had mentioned to him, but ultimately, Kevin still believed he could handle the situation. At the time, he didn't know Joe had already killed John. So on the afternoon of March 30th, that Saturday, Joe texts Kevin to come over for sex. Kevin agreed to meet Joe at her place. When Kevin got there, they just got right into it. Joe ended up forcing Kevin to wear a sequin dress before they had sex. But that's when things took a turn. Joe struck again. She stabbed Kevin multiple times, including deep wounds to the chest and to the back, ultimately killing him. Joe and Stretch soon disposed of Kevin's body. Together, they carried Kevin's body to another nearby ditch, but Joe's twisted mind was not satisfied. She ordered Stretch to position the body with Kevin's butt exposed to the sky, a final humiliation, as she called it. Then Joe and Stretch burned Kevin's car with his personal items inside. So obviously, Joe has now kind of warped into a serial killer. She kind of has similar MOs throughout. She's stabbing people, she's burning evidence, but in this specific situation, her crime has really escalated to the point she is positioning the body in a specific way to get some sort of satisfaction from it. And I think that's very common in certain cases of serial killers and certain types of murderers where they kind of set the scene a little bit. And I'm not 100% knowledgeable in the psychological aspect of why serial killers do that. But in this specific case, in kind of her own words, when she said it's like the final humiliation, it does kind of seem to be about control. And pair that with her sexual fantasies about, dressing someone up and raping them. They kind of go hand in hand. And if there's any truth to her being abused as a child, it could be some twisted way of her, I don't know, acting out some form of trauma. I mean, this is all just me analyzing this to a level that I don't know is necessary, but it is pretty insane that she has progressed to this level of horror, quite frankly, and to somebody that she was intimate with. So again, lack of empathy on her part. You are never close enough to this woman to be safe enough to endure her. Now, obviously, we know that Kevin has a wife back home. And when he didn't return home, his wife and family reported him missing, and the police began searching for Kevin. The following day, a dog walker ends up discovering Kevin's body in the ditch. Police knew fairly quickly they were looking for Joe, and they began a frantic nationwide manhunt for her. With 3 men dead, Joe Dennehy could have laid low, but instead, what does she do? She went in search for more victims. And after fleeing Peterborough, Joe and Stretch traveled nearly cross-country to Hartford, about 140 miles to the west. And along the way, they even picked up a hitchhiker named Mark Lloyd. And on the drive down the M5, Joe reportedly told Mark during that drive, "I've killed 3 people. Gary's helped me dispose of them, and I want to do some more. I want my fun." Obviously, Mark was terrified. He's in the vehicle with this woman. I mean, who wouldn't be scared, right? But ultimately, Mark ends up being a witness to the tornado that is Joe Dennehy, but isn't actually killed by her. So that afternoon, it was now April 2nd, Joe and Stretch went on a random attack spree in Hartford. As they were driving, they spotted a man named Robin Bariza, a 60-year-old school caretaker out walking his dog. Joe jumps out of the car and lunged at Robin from behind. She stabbed him twice before he even knew what was happening. In the bloody chaos, Robin managed to cry out, "What are you doing?" And according to the victim, Joe simply replied, "I'm hurting you. I'm going to fucking kill you." Robin then kicked Joe. In later interviews, he said it virtually had no impact on her. He said that she looked right through him and kept coming at him. Robin then apparently ran to the street where a passerby saw Robin bloody and in distress and ultimately intervened. Robin ended up being wounded but did not have any life-threatening injuries. After this attack, Joe gave Stretch a kiss on the cheek, and Stretch took off again with Mark still in the car. Now, just 9 minutes after the attack on Robin, Joe spots a man named John Rogers. He is a 48-year-old electrical salesman walking his dog on a nearby path. She again jumps out of the car, creeps up behind him, and begins stabbing him. John turned around to see her standing there with her knife raised. John screamed, "What's this all about?" Joe simply pointed to his belly and said, "I better do some more." John Rogers was bleeding profusely and collapsed on the road. He had been stabbed about 30 times, and he thought at that moment, like, this is where I'm going to die. But miraculously, both men were airlifted to hospital and survived after emergency surgery. After this attack, though, Joe had gotten back in the car and apparently she stank of blood. She had stolen John's dog, a whippet, and told Stretch and Mark, "It's me only friend." Mark said that afterwards, Gary drove off very, very calmly. Just another day, living their life, it seems, right? Like, not even fazed by the fact that they are, well, in this case, attempting to murder two innocent men. Just shocking. And I'm sure you can all imagine that Mark is having like the craziest hitchhiking experience of his freaking life right now. Like, he is no longer a willing participant in this arrangement. He's probably scared shitless, can't leave the vehicle, and is just trying to like stay silent, be part of the crew, man. What else are you going to do? Like, you need to survive this, right? You've just witnessed this woman try to kill two men. And from what Mark knows, she has killed two men. And from her own accounts, has killed three. So, yeah, it's a pretty scary situation all in all. Mark had said that basically the feeling he got after these attacks took place was that it was as if the two of them had just stopped for McDonald's and were just heading back out on the road. That's how little shits they gave. Now, because these two victims survived, they had been able to describe Joe and the car she was in to police. And by chance, two police officers see Joe and Stretch sitting in the green Astra, a car just off the south side of Belmont Road. And she is there with Archie the Whippet, and she is immediately taken out of the vehicle and arrested. And in her pocket, there was, in fact, the bloodied knife that she had used to attack these two men. After Joe's arrest, she was taken to Ardenley Hospital in Birmingham to be assessed, and she was diagnosed with having psychopathic and personality disorders. It was also determined that Joe had a paraphilia known as sadomasochism, meaning she derived sexual pleasure from both giving and receiving pain and humiliation, which, again, makes sense with the murders that she has done up to this point, specifically the murder of Kevin Lee. At the time, doctors also observed that she showed no empathy or remorse for others. She was also a skilled manipulator, reportedly feeling no remorse when causing harm. Now, just a few days after Joe and Stretch's arrest, the other two victims, Lucas and John, had been found buried under light vegetation in the ditch. Joe was then sent to Bronzefield Prison in Ashford, and attempted to build relationships with the male prison guards. Her goal in doing this was to use these guards as an escape plan. They only found out about it because 2 inmates had brought it to the guards' attention. In her prison cell, guards found diary entries outlining an escape plan, and it read, "Kill or injure a prison officer, cut off his finger, and use that print to trick the biometric door locks." Obviously, after this whole plan was found out, Joe was sent back to Peterborough prison and was put in solitary confinement from September 2013 to September 2015, all because of her escape plan and safety to all of the people around her. Obviously, even in prison, people are at risk to endure this woman and her psychopathic tendencies. But I will say that is a long time to be in solitary confinement. Surely that would make someone who was already experiencing deviant thoughts and behaviors and just like abnormal fantasies and whatnot. Surely it would only make someone who was, in that frame of mind worse. I could imagine if you're alone with your own thoughts with no human interaction and your thoughts were terrible of killing people and hurting others and taking advantage of people. I don't know. I feel like that would make it worse, yeah? Either way, that's just my thoughts on the whole ordeal here. But anyways, back to what happens next. So, at the Old Bailey in London, Joe Dennehy's trial was quite short and shocking. On the 18th of November in 2013, just hours after her charges were read, Dennehy unexpectedly pled guilty to all 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. The judges were completely stunned by this, and when asked if she truly meant it, Dennehy replied curtly, "I've pleaded guilty and that's that." And early on the 28th of February of 2014, Justice Spencer delivered an unprecedented sentence. Dennehy, he declared, was a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer. He ordered her to spend the rest of her life in prison with no possibility of parole and was sent back to Bronzefield. While there, she wanted to be feared and the top dog. She had threatened several other inmates' lives, and she was, as we know, eventually put into solitary confinement to protect the other inmates from her violence. When they did this, Joe threatened to sue them in the European Court of Human Rights. Now, this actually puts the prison between a rock and a hard place because they have to make a decision between violating Joe's human rights or letting her out and have her kill someone. So basically, it just doesn't seem to matter where Joe was placed because throughout her time in prison, she constantly caused trouble and other inmates were truly terrified of her and would do anything she wanted to avoid conflict, which honestly kind of seems to be a common theme in a lot of the relationships that we've heard of. Maybe not Stretch per se, but especially with Kevin Lee, he outright said this to his friends. Now, this type of dynamic seems to really please Joe. She seems to thrive on it, in fact. Now, during her lifelong stay in the prison, Joe kind of seemed to be looking for a way out, and that was apparent in a relationship that she actually formed with another inmate, Haley, while she was there. Apparently, in 2018, the 2 women entered into a suicide pact. They both brought razor blades into their cells and harmed themselves, leaving blood throughout the area. Both were taken to the hospital, and thankfully they did survive. Prison officials determined they needed to be separated, though, and once they had recovered, they were transferred to different facilities. Now, Haley was eventually released from prison, and Joe promised her now fiancé that she would not kill anyone else. However, her constant manipulation and control tactics in prison remind everyone on a daily basis that she will do whatever she pleases if she has the opportunity, and she will do whatever serves her. what I truly find a little bit wild about the suicide pact situation is clearly Haley was getting out of prison in due time, right? Like, she was gonna be among us all, and she is. So it does surprise me that somehow she entered into this suicide pact when there was hope for a future for her. Like, I know not for Joe, but definitely for Haley. So, I mean, the speculation here would be, did Joe convince Haley at the time to enter this suicide pact to kind of, have someone join her in her misery? Or was it kind of like an intentional Shakespearean outcome? Like, I don't know. Did they mean to just die together so they could be together forever? Like, we really don't know, but it does seem weird for someone with hope and a future outside of prison to enter into a suicide pact with somebody. So, anyways, we have yet to kind of speak of the elephant in the room, that is Stretch, because Joe wasn't the only one to go to prison for these crimes. Her accomplices were also tried. Gary, aka Stretch Richards, was convicted of assisting in the murders and attempting to kill the Hartford victims. He received a life sentence with a minimum of 19 years. Leslie Layton was convicted of perverting the course of justice and other charges, getting 14 years. Now, even a third man, Robert Moore, got a 3-year sentence for helping dispose of the bodies. So, pretty crazy. She kind of left a wake of destruction in her path. And I'm not saying that these people aren't guilty of their crimes and being accomplices to her crimes. Like, they made their decisions, they knew what they were doing, and they had a choice to act differently. But it is kind of crazy that she just kind of caught so many people up in this, and so many people ended up, ruining their lives as a result. Now, ultimately, at the end of all this, we've talked enough about Joe, but there were a lot of families in this situation that were devastated by their loved ones being killed. So, in the courtroom and beyond, the tragedy was heartbreakingly clear. Kevin Lee's widow, Christina, and their 2 teenage children learned that the angelic father and husband who loved music and family had been butchered by someone he sheltered. Outside the Old Bailey courtroom, the Lee family released a statement, and it read, "This tragedy has shaken our lives to the core, and we are devastated about how Kevin's life came to an end. Joanna Dennehy has taken over our lives and has callously created a hole that cannot be filled. Kevin was much loved by all his family, and he will be greatly missed." The Slabovchevsky family, who had hoped to see Lukasz marry his Polish girlfriend, were equally stunned. They said, "Lukasz's death shocked us all, as no one had any clue this could happen." John Chapman's relatives also mourned after a stranger brutally attacked him in the very home where he lived. And even the surviving victims, Robin and John from Hartford, struggled with trauma. Police noted that 2 of the victims will live with what Dennehy has done for the rest of their lives, hoping that the convictions would bring them some small measure of closure. Now, as I said, this case was shocking. Not only was it heinous, but it kind of flipped traditional gender roles. Criminologists were quick in this case to underline how exceptional this case was. Dr. Samantha Lundgren, a senior lecturer in criminology, called Dennehy a classic psychopath, expressing that Dennehy had reversed these traditional gender roles because she was controlling and killing the men around her with an intimate weapon, a knife, something almost unheard of for woman killers. In essence, Dennehy's case baffled experts. She didn't fit the typical profile of a serial killer. Most serial killers often have long cooling off periods and different motives. Instead, Dennehy's spree was frenzied and almost celebratory. Even Gary Richards' stretch during his time in jail came to this stark conclusion. In a telephone call to a former partner, he said about Jo, "Well, she's just that way. She's just off her head." In other words, he could only explain her actions by acknowledging she seemed fundamentally insane, not in the psychiatric sense of hallucinations, but in being psychotically violent and remorseless. So ultimately, we have a woman who really derailed from the norm to what criminologists know about serial killers and murderers in general. And she was insanely destructive and ruined innocent people's lives for the thrill, for the sake of it all, for herself and what she got from it all. And that's just sick and twisted. And I feel for everyone who has to live with the wreckage she caused in their lives. So, anyways, thanks everyone. Thanks for listening. And next week, Becky will be joining us. And yeah, she'll get to tell us all about her trip to BC. So that's it for today, guys. See you next week. And just your weekly reminder to download our weekly episodes, follow us on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, and give us a follow on our social medias. You can find us at Luminol on the Wall. Can't wait till next week.